Hi, my name is Sarah Oberbichler and I'm a researcher at the Institute for Contemporary History at the University of Innsbruck. I'm a historian and within the NewsEye project I'm working on research questions related to media and migration. Migration, and here I'm talking about immigration and emigration, as well as return migration, has always been a topic in newspaper coverage today, but also in the 19th and the early 20th century, when millions of people left Europe to find a better life abroad. The discourses and arguments that accompany news coverage on migration have a long tradition, and even though the historical context changed a lot, many arguments remain the same over many decades. For example, can you imagine that European emigrants to overseas once were confronted with very similar arguments than immigrants to Europe today? While at one time they were seen as a benefit to the local economy, in the next breath they were seen as a danger to the country or its people. Today, Europe is stronger confronted with immigration than emigration, but this has not always been the case. Mass emigration has shaped the world of the 19th and the early 20th century in Europe. Millions of people left Europe to find a better life, but also to escape the crisis-driven homeland. Newspapers were an important medium to circulate news on emigration, to warn about uncontrolled emigration, but also to advertise products and services connected to emigration. Competing shipping companies, settlement companies, and the target colonies themselves were wooing passengers with more or less beautiful advertising pamphlets, with ads in newspapers, or with agents across the country. In addition, emigration was more than a lucrative source of income for agencies and companies. Local shops found ways to make money while offering goods and services for emigrants. Hotels and grocery stores provided migrants with food and accommodation on their way to the harbor. So I was asking the question, what kind of advertisements can be found in newspaper reports on immigration? What were people selling, or what were they searching for? When and in what context did advertisements appear, and how did they change over time? So, in order to find advertisements connected to emigration, my workflow starts with building a topic-specific collection, using keyword search. I'm not looking for advertisements specifically at this point, because it would be impossible to find them with keyword search alone. And because representativeness and quality are important to answer historical research questions, I'm trying to find as many newspaper clippings as possible without having to deal with too many irrelevant articles. Therefore, I need to find good keywords. This can be done by close reading of a bigger number of articles related to emigration, but also the keyword suggestion tool can be very helpful at this stage. This tool uses word embeddings to find semantically similar words for a specific term. In my case, I'm using Auswanderer, the German word for emigrants. This suggestion is giving me already many hints of what other words can be used to create a corpus on emigration. For example, the words Ansiedler, settler in English, or colonist in English. In order to see how relevant the results of a specific keyword are for my research question, I like to use the function getARandomSample. In doing so, I can go through a random sample of newspapers and checking the results one by one. Once I have found all relevant search queries for the topic on emigration, I can create my own dataset. Therefore, I first create an empty dataset as a first step and add selected articles to this data in a second step. Further, close reading almost always gives me hints of one or more important keywords that I have not considered so far. If this is the case, I simply add more newspaper clippings to my dataset. For my own dataset, I chose 4 different time periods, where emigration was an important topic, and 4 Austrian newspapers, the Innsbrucker Nachrichten, the Neue Freie Presse, the Arbeiter Zeitung, and the Illustrierte Kronen Zeitung. This gave me a dataset of over 11,000 articles. In the private workspace of the demonstrator, I can go through my collection and, if necessary, delete or add further text. Finding advertisements within this collection would be, however, very time-consuming. Too time-consuming actually, to continue without further help. I will need some help to automatically extract ads from the whole collection on emigration. This is something that goes beyond the possibility in the platform. The export functions in the demonstrator allow me, however, to continue with other tools outside the platform. But before I'm doing this, I'm going to investigate the whole collection, since the context of this collection is important, even though I'm interested in advertisements. Firstly, I'm interested how often newspapers were reporting on emigration within the 4 selected timeframes. Therefore, I'm extracting facets from the dataset. As can be seen in the first graph, newspaper coverage on emigration peaked in 1913, a year when emigration became a highly political issue, as it is known. As recent media studies showed, political discourse and media reporting are closely interwoven, which is also true with the 1913 emigration media discourse. A closer look at the historical newspapers provides information about the reasons. Important backgrounds were, amongst others, the emigration of men liable for military service, who tried to evade it, as well as the return of men liable for military service who lived outside of Austria. Interesting results can be also obtained if named entities, which refer to terms that represent real-world objects like people, places, or organizations, and their stances are being investigated. With the tool Extract Names, the evolution of the most frequent named entities and their stances can be visualized. Stances determine whether an entity is used in a positive, negative, or neutral context. While many stances in newspapers remain implicit, this graph gives an impression of what places have been talked about as explicit, negative, or positive. The United States were the most frequent country within the corpus, but also Germany, Hungary, Brazil, Galicia, Canada, or Palestine were mentioned frequently. Most of the places appeared in more explicit negative contexts than in explicit positive contexts, a result that can be confirmed by close reading of the texts. Newspapers were an ideal medium for convincing those who are willing to emigrate, but at the same time, however, newspapers also frequently warned against emigration in order to prevent excessive, but above all, also uncontrolled emigration. But now it is time to take a closer look at advertisements. Since this cannot be done in the platform, I created a Jupyter notebook, which is a web-based interactive environment that allows to combine code and narrative to help classify newspaper clippings. This notebook helps to create a topic model algorithm based on pre-classified newspaper clippings. Topic modeling is a probability-based method for exploring larger collections of texts. The classification depends on a smaller but representative manually annotated collection that was created and also exported within the NewsEye platform. This collection was annotated with 7 categories: news, advertisements, the category culture, literature and letters, the category appeals, donations and informations, as well as the categories crime, finance, and statistic. To each category, a number between 0 and 7 was assigned. For the training, this smaller collection was divided into a training and a testing corpus. Consequently, a model with 500 topics was trained on the training corpus. The model was considered as good if more than 80% of the documents in the test corpus were classified correctly. Finally, the model was used on the whole collection and the results were visualized. Although not all of the newspaper clippings were classified correctly, as close reading of a considerable amount of text has shown, the overall impression of the visualization can be confirmed. As can be seen in this figure, advertisements were the least common category in the emigration discourse, while news, statistics and financial coverage took up most of the reportings. The amount of emigration coverage that relates to crime issues is actually surprisingly high. The same is true for the amount of coverage related to culture, literature, stories and letters, as well as appeals, donations and information. A diachronic frequency graph shows when advertisements most frequently appeared in the context of emigration. What is very interesting in this graph is that unlike the news coverage on emigration in general, where 1913 was the year with the highest number of newspaper clippings, the years 1919 or 1939 seem important in the context of advertisements. For the context, in 1919, the crisis-ridden economic situation after the First World War has led to mass emigration to overseas, and 1938 the political situation had led to a forced emigration of Jewish people. These are interesting findings and call for a closer look into the documents and for comparison with other categories within the immigration discourse. As can be seen in the following comparison, very few advertisements were printed before the First World War. But crime reporting was very high during this time. Interesting is also that donations, appeals and information played a role before the First World War and again after the Second World War, but not during the war, while literature and stories definitely did. But what kind of advertisements can be found? For example, in 1919. The mass emigration after the First World War and the difficult economic situation forced many people to leave Austria and sell their property. Surprisingly, property was not only sold, but people were also searching for property from other peoples that were actually planning to emigrate. Emigrants often had to sell faster since they could not wait too long to find someone who is buying. But also services such as language lessons were sold or were searched for. People were offering courses or searching for teachers for specific languages. And those lessons were actually specifically sold for emigrants. Finally, especially women were looking for partners that were about to emigrate. Or men were looking for women that were willing to emigrate with them. But not only romantic companionship for emigration was searched for. Also other interested women or men that were looking for the support of a group to emigrate. Finally, also some goods were unaddressed on emigrants. For example, condensed milk was advertised for emigrants by a Swiss company called Baron and Liebig. And there are of course many other topics, but this presentation showed my workflow, how to go from research questions to actually finding advertisements on immigration and analyzing them.